Transformation starts with a decision, a single internal shift where you finally stop entertaining the thoughts that have kept you limited for years. It begins in the quiet moment when you realize no one is coming to rescue you, no perfect timing is arriving, and no external permission is required. This decision is not loud or dramatic. It is a firm, private declaration that you are done living beneath your potential. It is the spark that ignites the fire for everything that comes next. And without it, nothing changes, but with it, nothing stays the same. When you decide to transform, you interrupt your old programming. You stop allowing your past experiences to dictate your future direction. You start stepping away from the comfort zones that once felt protective but eventually became cages. This decision is what dismantles those invisible walls, the ones built from doubt, fear, and hesitation. The decision alone is powerful enough to break patterns you have carried for years because it shifts your internal standards of what you accept and what you refuse to tolerate moving forward. The moment you make this decision, your awareness sharpens. You begin to see the habits that have been silently sabotaging your progress. You notice the conversations that drain your energy, the distractions that steal your focus, and the excuses that sound convincing but keep you anchored to the same place. What once felt normal now feels misaligned because transformation exposes everything that doesn't match the person you are becoming. This clarity is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Deciding to transform also creates a new level of accountability. You stop blaming circumstances, time, or other people, and you take full responsibility for the direction of your life. Responsibility becomes your strength, not your burden. Instead of waiting for change, you become the initiator of change. This decision shifts your mindset from passive observation to active creation, and suddenly you are no longer reacting to life. You are directing it. Once the decision is made, your actions begin to change naturally. You wake up with a different energy, a different focus, a different urgency. You no longer move based on mood or motivation, but based on commitment. Small tasks gain meaning because you understand they are building the foundation for the new version of you. Even the ordinary moments begin to feel intentional because your direction has shifted internally first. This decision forces you to confront your fears rather than avoid them. You begin to challenge the negative stories you have repeated to yourself for years. Instead of letting fear dictate your steps, you walk toward the very things you once avoided. You learn that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions. This is where confidence starts to grow, not from perfection, but from progress. Transformation begins to take shape when you stop identifying with your limitations. The decision allows you to recognize that the stories that once defined you are not permanent. You stop saying, "This is just who I am," and you replace it with, "This is who I am choosing to become." Identity begins to shift with every disciplined action, every boundary you set, and every time you show up, even when it's hard. You are rewriting the narrative from the inside out. As you continue acting on this decision, momentum begins to build. What felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What seemed impossible becomes achievable. You realize transformation isn't one big leap, but a series of small, consistent steps that compound over time. Each step reinforces the decision you made, strengthening your belief in your ability to change. Momentum becomes your ally, pushing you forward even when motivation fluctuates. This decision also influences the opportunities you attract. When you elevate your standards, life begins to respond differently. You start meeting people who match your new energy, discovering resources that were always available but unnoticed, and stepping into environments that support your growth. The world doesn't change because of your decision, but the way you interact with it does, and that alone transforms everything around you. Ultimately, transformation starts with a decision because the moment you decide, everything internal shifts before anything external does. You begin to move differently, think differently, and expect differently. The decision becomes the anchor that holds you steady when challenges appear and the fuel that keeps you going when progress is slow. It is the foundation upon which every breakthrough, every elevation, and every new beginning is built. You must outgrow the old version of yourself because the life you want cannot be built with the habits, beliefs, and limitations of who you used to be. Growth requires shedding the layers that no longer serve you, even if they once felt comfortable or familiar. The old version of you is necessary for where you were, but it is not sufficient for where you are going. Outgrowing yourself is not an act of rejection, it is an act of evolution. It's choosing to rise above the patterns that kept you stagnant and step into the version of yourself that aligns with your future, not your past. Outgrowing your old self means letting go of the stories that made you play small. The narratives you told yourself about your limits, your potential, your worth, become outdated the moment you decide to elevate. You start to realize that many of these stories were never true. They were simply repeated often enough to feel real. When you begin rewriting those stories, you also begin rewriting your life. Suddenly, what you once believed was beyond you becomes attainable when you stop carrying the identity that kept you stuck. As you outgrow who you were, your tolerance changes. You stop accepting the behaviors, environments, and distractions that once felt normal. Your old self tolerated procrastination, fear, and excuses, but your future self demands discipline, courage, and clarity. You start noticing the subtle ways you held yourself back, and you refuse to keep participating in your own limitations. The things that once entertained you no longer interest you, and the things that once intimidated you no longer control you. Outgrowing your past self often means outgrowing certain relationships as well. Not everyone is meant to continue with you on the next level. Some people only understand the version of you that kept you small, and they may resist or question your growth. This is not a sign to shrink. It is a sign to continue rising. You must choose evolution over approval and alignment over attachment. The right people will grow with you or support your growth, but you cannot dim your light to make others comfortable. This process requires courage because the familiar always tries to pull you back. Your old self will whisper reminders of comfort, telling you that change is risky and uncertainty is dangerous. But staying the same is the greatest risk of all. There is a silent cost to holding on to the version of you that settled, hesitated, or feared change. When you step beyond that version, you start discovering abilities, strengths, and potential you didn't even know you had. Growth feels uncomfortable because you are stepping into territory your old self never dared to explore. Outgrowing your old self means creating new standards for how you live, think, and behave. You begin to operate with intention instead of default. You replace reactive choices with deliberate decisions. You stop giving energy to things that don't align with your destiny. The old version of you ran on habits built from survival. The new version of you operates from purpose. This shift in standards changes everything, from your productivity to your mindset to your daily routines. As you evolve, you also develop a new level of self-respect. You realize that the way you treat yourself sets the tone for how the world treats you. You stop abandoning your goals, dismissing your needs, or downplaying your strengths. The old self may have tolerated inconsistency or self-sabotage, but the new self demands alignment and integrity. Each decision you make becomes a declaration of your worth and a reflection of your growth. Outgrowing the old version of yourself means challenging your comfort zones daily. You push past the resistance that once stopped you, not because the fear disappears, but because you refuse to let it limit you anymore. You learn to take action without waiting for perfect conditions. You learn to move forward even when the path is unclear. This proactive mindset separates the person you were from the person you are becoming. As you continue evolving, you begin to see the possibilities that were invisible to your old identity. You start to think on a higher level, dream bigger, and expect more from yourself. Opportunities that once felt out of reach now feel natural because your mindset has expanded. You start trusting your ability to grow into whatever your vision demands. The version of you that once doubted is slowly replaced by a version that believes, acts, and rises with intention. Ultimately, to reach the life that calls to you, you must outgrow the life that confined you. The old version of you was a chapter, not the entire book. You evolve by choosing growth over comfort, purpose over familiarity, and identity over limitation. Every step you take away from who you used to be brings you closer to the person you were always meant to become. Discipline is the foundation of reinvention because without consistent action, even the strongest desire for change remains nothing more than a dream. Reinvention is not built on motivation, which comes and goes, but on discipline. which shows up regardless of how you feel. It is the structure that supports every new habit, every new standard, and every new identity you want to create. Discipline is the quiet force that turns intention into transformation, making it the core ingredient of any lasting change. When you commit to discipline, you begin dismantling the behaviors that held you back. You stop relying on temporary inspiration and instead build systems that make progress unavoidable. Discipline teaches you to move whether you feel ready or not. Because readiness is a luxury, but action is a necessity. It becomes the mechanism that breaks the cycle of procrastination and pushes you into consistent forward motion. This steady movement is what allows reinvention to take shape day after day. Discipline also separates who you were from who you are becoming. The old version of you acted based on comfort, convenience, and mood, but the reinvented version acts based on commitment. Discipline ensures that your actions align with your goals, not your emotions. It anchors you when distractions try to pull you back to familiar patterns. With discipline, you no longer let your past dictate your future because your daily decisions begin reflecting the identity you are building, not the identity you are leaving behind. Reinvention requires a level of consistency that discipline is uniquely designed to provide. Big goals don't transform you, the daily actions behind them do. Discipline is what turns those actions into a lifestyle rather than a short-lived phase. It turns small steps into powerful momentum. It turns repetition into mastery. It turns effort into results that compound over time. Consistency is where the true magic of reinvention begins, and discipline is the only way to maintain that consistency. Through discipline, you learn to override the excuses that once controlled your decisions. Instead of negotiating with yourself, you establish standards that are non-negotiable. You show up even when it's hard, even when it's inconvenient, even when your mind tries to convince you to quit. Discipline rewires your internal dialogue from "I don't feel like it" to "this is who I am now." It shifts your identity through repeated alignment with your goals rather than momentary impulses. Discipline also builds confidence in a way that nothing else can. Every time you follow through on a commitment, you prove to yourself that you are capable of more than you previously believed. Confidence is not created by achievements alone. It is created by the trust you build with yourself through disciplined action. When you consistently honor your goals, you start to believe you can become the person you envision. This belief fuels reinvention from the inside out. The foundation of reinvention is also strengthened by discipline because it forces you to prioritize what truly matters. You become more intentional with your time, your energy, and your focus. You stop wasting hours on things that don't contribute to your growth. You stop allowing distractions to dominate your day. Discipline brings clarity, and clarity brings power. With a disciplined mind, you begin choosing progress over pleasure, purpose over comfort, and elevation over distraction. As you immerse yourself in discipline, you begin to realize that it is not restrictive. It is liberating. It frees you from the chaos of inconsistency. It frees you from the stress of unfinished commitments. It frees you from the self-doubt created by broken promises. When your actions align with your desires, life becomes simpler and more intentional. Reinvention becomes less about forcing change and more about embodying it through the structure discipline provides. Discipline creates the internal environment necessary for your reinvention to become permanent. Without it, any change you make will be temporary, easily undone by old habits that wait for a moment of weakness. Discipline eliminates those weak moments by establishing routines and boundaries that keep you aligned even when circumstances shift. It becomes the internal backbone that supports your new identity until the new identity becomes your natural way of living. In the journey of reinvention, discipline is not just a tool. It is the very ground you stand on. It is what separates wishful thinking from intentional transformation. It is what turns goals into realities and vision into identity. Reinvention is not something you stumble into. It is something you build day by day through the disciplined actions that shape you into the person you are meant to become. Your environment and standards shape your life because everything around you is constantly influencing the person you become, even when you're not aware of it. The people you interact with, the conversations you engage in, the spaces you spend time in, and the energy you allow into your life all shape your mindset and behavior. Your environment is either feeding your growth or feeding your distractions, and most people underestimate how deeply their surroundings determine their outcomes. When you elevate your environment, you automatically elevate your thinking, your habits, and your expectations for yourself. As you grow, you begin to recognize that your environment reflects your standards, and your standards reflect your self-worth. The moment you raise your standards, everything in your life begins to shift. You start expecting more from yourself and demanding more from the world around you. Low standards attract low outcomes. High standards attract high outcomes. When your standards rise, you stop tolerating inconsistency, negativity, and mediocrity. You begin to align your surroundings with the life you're trying to build, not the life you're trying to escape. Your environment shapes your beliefs by either reinforcing your potential or reinforcing your limitations. If you surround yourself with people who think small, complain often, and fear change, you'll eventually adopt the same habits without even noticing. But if you immerse yourself in environments where growth is normal, discipline is expected, and ambition is encouraged, you will rise simply by association. The standards of the people around you become the standards you unconsciously adopt, which is why choosing your environment is choosing your future. Your environment influences your behavior because you adapt to whatever you're consistently exposed to. A cluttered environment creates a cluttered mind. A negative environment produces negative thinking. A stagnant environment encourages stagnant habits. But a focused, inspiring, and growth-oriented environment activates parts of you that would remain dormant in the wrong surroundings. You begin to move differently when the space around you supports who you are becoming, not who you used to be. Your standards act as the filter through which you allow things into your life. When your standards are low, anything gets access. Low effort habits, draining relationships, distractions, and behaviors that sabotage your progress. But when your standards rise, access becomes limited to what aligns with your identity and your goals. You begin to choose peace over chaos, discipline over comfort, and alignment over convenience. High standards create boundaries, and boundaries create freedom. Your environment also influences your energy, and your energy determines your execution. Being around people who uplift you, challenge you, and inspire you creates momentum. Being in spaces that reflect clarity, purpose, and stability fuels your drive. When your environment supports your growth, it becomes easier to perform at a higher level because the external world reinforces the internal changes you are trying to make. Your energy rises when your surroundings match your goals. Your standards shape your habits because they determine what you are willing to accept from yourself. If you set a high standard for discipline, you show up whether you feel like it or not. If you set a high standard for focus, you stop allowing distractions to pull you away from your purpose. If you set a high standard for self-respect, you stop engaging in behaviors that contradict your worth. When your standards rise, your habits naturally elevate to match them. Your environment affects your vision by expanding or shrinking your sense of possibility. Being in the wrong environment makes your dreams feel unrealistic, but being in the right environment makes them feel inevitable. When you witness others striving, achieving, and elevating, it challenges your internal ceiling. It pushes you to think bigger, act bolder, and believe deeper. The environment becomes a mirror that reflects what is possible for you, and the higher the standards within that environment, the higher your vision becomes. Your standards influence your emotional baseline because they determine what you allow yourself to feel on a regular basis. With high standards, you stop accepting stress, chaos, and emotional instability as normal. You begin to prioritize peace, clarity, and intentional living. This shift creates a healthier internal environment, which amplifies your external performance. Your emotional state becomes more stable, allowing you to make decisions from strength rather than survival. Your environment and standards ultimately shape your life because they dictate who you become over time. Change doesn't happen through willpower alone, it happens through alignment. When your environment supports your goals and your standards reflect your highest self, every area of your life begins to transform. You start moving differently, thinking differently, and choosing differently because you've placed yourself in a world that nurtures your potential and demanded a level of excellence that pulls your future closer with every step. Results come from behavior, not intentions, because your life is shaped by what you repeatedly do, not what you hope to do someday. Intentions can make you feel inspired, but they don't create change unless they evolve into consistent action. Many people carry powerful dreams and meaningful goals, but without disciplined behaviors to support them, those dreams remain ideas instead of realities. Outcomes are produced by action, and action is produced by behavior that aligns with the results you want. Intentions often live in your mind, while behavior is what shows up in your daily routine. You can intend to wake up early, but if you keep hitting the snooze button, the result will always stay the same. You can intend to build a business, but if you spend your time on distractions, your progress will remain stagnant. Behavior is the true measurement of commitment because it reveals what you prioritize, what you value, and what you are truly willing to sacrifice for the life you want. When your behavior is inconsistent, your results become unpredictable. You cannot expect excellence when your actions are sporadic. Results require repetition, structure, and follow-through. Doing something once won't transform your life, but doing it daily will reshape everything. Consistency builds the momentum that intentions alone can never generate. The more aligned your behavior becomes, the more your results begin to reflect your potential instead of your excuses. Intentions can be comforting because they make you feel like you're moving towards something, but behavior is uncomfortable because it demands effort. This is why many people stay stuck. They cling to intention and avoid execution. Behavior requires sacrifice, discipline, and the willingness to push past resistance. But the discomfort of action is temporary, while the regret of inaction can last a lifetime. When you choose behavior over intention, you choose growth over comfort. Every result you desire has a corresponding behavior that must support it. If you want financial freedom, you need behaviors like budgeting, learning, investing, and disciplined spending. If you want strong health, you need behaviors like nutrition, movement, and rest. If you want personal growth, you need behaviors like reading, reflecting, and challenging yourself. Results are simply the reflection of the behaviors you practice consistently, not the goals you wish for. Behavior builds identity, and identity shapes destiny. When you repeatedly take action aligned with your goals, you begin to see yourself differently. You start believing you are disciplined, capable, and committed. This internal shift influences your future decisions, making it easier to continue the behaviors that produce results. Identity does not change through intention. It changes through the evidence you create by your actions. Intentions can be influenced by emotions, but behavior must be anchored in discipline. There will be days when you don't feel like working, learning, or improving. If you rely on intention alone, you will only take action when you feel motivated. But behavior driven by discipline ensures that you move even when motivation is low. This separation between feeling and action is what creates long-term transformation and dependable outcomes. Your behavior shapes the pace at which your life progresses. Small behaviors repeated daily eventually create massive results. Even the smallest action, when done consistently, compounds into something powerful. People often underestimate this, waiting for a big breakthrough instead of committing to the small steps that lead to breakthroughs. Every meaningful achievement is built on a foundation of small, intentional behaviors that are executed long before the success becomes visible. When you shift your focus from what you want to what you do, your life begins to change. You stop talking about goals and start building the habits that bring them to life. You stop dreaming about change and start becoming the person capable of creating it. Behavior is the bridge between where you are and where you want to be. The more aligned your behaviors are with your vision, the faster your vision materializes. Results come from behavior, not intentions, because behavior is the only thing that produces evidence of progress. You are not defined by what you plan to do or hope to do, but by what you actually do. When your actions begin to reflect your vision, your environment shifts, your habits evolve, and your results transform. By aligning your behavior with your desired outcomes, you take full ownership of your future and step into the reality you once only imagined. 1 week is enough to spark lifetime momentum because meaningful change begins the moment you shift your direction, not the moment you reach your destination. 7 days may seem small in the context of an entire life, but when those days are filled with intentional action, discipline, and clarity, they become the catalyst for transformation. 1 week can interrupt years of stagnation, shift your mindset, and ignite a level of focus that alters the trajectory of your life. Momentum doesn't require perfection, it requires initiation, and 1 week is all it takes to ignite that spark. In 1 week, you can break cycles that have held you back for far too long. The habits that kept you stuck can be replaced with habits that move you forward. The excuses that once felt normal start losing their power when you choose to act instead of delay. A single week of consistency begins rewriting your neurological patterns, teaching your mind and body that you are capable of more than you previously believed. This short period becomes the beginning of a new identity, one built on action rather than intention. 1 week is powerful because it exposes your potential. When you commit fully, even for a short burst of time, you see how much you can actually accomplish when you stop negotiating with yourself. You realize that most limitations were mental, not physical. You discover that you have more discipline, more resilience, and more strength than you ever gave yourself credit for. These realizations create confidence, and confidence is the fuel that drives long-term momentum. During a focused week, your priorities naturally shift. You stop giving energy to distractions and start directing your attention toward what actually matters. You begin creating boundaries that support your growth, routines that strengthen your discipline, and habits that align with your future. Even if the changes are small, they begin stacking, creating an internal shift that extends far beyond the initial 7 days. This shift is what transforms a simple week into a launching pad for long-term elevation. 1 week of intentional action also builds momentum because it interrupts your usual patterns. When you do something differently, your mind wakes up, you become more aware of your choices, your time, and your direction. This heightened awareness helps you break autopilot behaviors that kept you stagnant. Instead of drifting through your days, you become intentional, alert, and conscious of every action you take. This state of awareness carries forward, allowing the momentum to continue long after the week ends. Momentum thrives on consistency, and a single week is long enough to create the rhythm that consistency requires. When you show up every day for 7 days, you prove to yourself that you can follow through. You build a pattern that becomes easier to sustain because your mind adapts to the new normal. The hardest part of creating momentum is getting started, and 1 week is enough to push past the initial resistance. Once the rhythm is established, continuing becomes more natural. A focused week can also shift your environment and relationships by elevating your energy. When you start changing, everything around you begins to respond differently. You attract new conversations, new opportunities, and new levels of clarity. People notice when you shift your energy, and sometimes that alone opens doors you never expected. This environmental shift adds even more momentum, turning 1 week of effort into a chain reaction of progress. 1 week is enough to spark lifetime momentum because it gives you evidence that growth is possible, that discipline can be developed, and that change doesn't require years of preparation. Evidence is what strengthens belief, and belief is what drives long-term transformation. When you can point to a committed week and see real progress, you create a new internal narrative that supports your evolution instead of resisting it. Even if you don't see massive external results in 7 days, you will feel the internal changes taking place. Your clarity sharpens, your confidence rises, and your sense of control increases. You begin to trust yourself more, and that self-trust becomes the foundation for continued growth. The internal wins are what produce the external wins, and 1 week is enough time to generate both the mindset and the momentum needed for lifelong elevation. 1 week is enough to spark lifetime momentum, because momentum doesn't come from the amount of time you spend, but from the intensity, focus, and consistency you bring to that time. When you commit to 7 days with intention, you create a shift powerful enough to influence your future long after the week has passed. It becomes the start of a new mindset, a new standard, and a new version of yourself that continues to grow, evolve, and rise with every step forward.